Okay, so welcome to episode 1 of We Are Pioneers. Where
Okay.
we're going to talk about the Curtis, Perry, James. Did I forget any names? Family history.
That's close enough.
And my name is Julia Curtis Burns. What's your name, Mom?
My name is Ruth Constance Curtis. I'm the mom of said Julia Curtis Burns.
Oh, well, my middle name is Ruth, Julia Ruth Curtis Burns, if we're going to give all of our names. So the idea of recording this came from the fact that, Mom, you have a lot of information in your head, right?
Yeah.
And we need to write it down. And our family has a unique history, I think. And so it's important to keep record of dates. So I thought that we would talk today about some of the history behind how our family first got started. So, for example, who was Princess? Because that's really, I remember growing up, that's the root of where our family ancestor evolved from.
That's the earliest ancestor we know about,
Right.
that we can identify by a name.
And her name was Princess?
Well, her name here was Princess, but in Madagascar, I'm sure she had a typical Madagascan name.
Mm-hmm.
And she was apparently of the royalty there.
Okay.
But you want me to tell what happened now?
Yeah, so she's our family's earliest known by name ancestor. So
Yeah.
Let's start with thinking about Princess. Do we have any documentation, or is this a word of mouth that you're going to tell us?
Well, I'm looking right now for the book by Horace Mann Bond called Black Scholars in America.
Okay.
And no, that's incorrect. Black American Scholars. And one of the focuses of his book was the Curtises. And he interviewed Daddy, William Childs Curtis, my father, and got the family tree. And I'm still looking for that book because it's tucked away somewhere. I haven't looked at it in 20 years, but he did a little research. Horace Mann Bond, that was Julian Bond's father.
Mm-hmm.
Horace Mann Bond, he was a scholar himself. He taught at various traditionally African-American colleges. And he identified, based on what Daddy told him, he identified a ship that came into Baltimore in about 1740 or 50, something like that.
Okay.
That appeared to have people from Madagascar on it. So it's a guess, of course, because there weren't any names.
Right.
But he was saying that the princess could have been on that ship. But what happened was, the way she got over here was the French had a long-standing connection with an attempt to colonize Madagascar. And so
your picture's not showing, Mom. We can't see your face.
Yeah, it just went to R. Wait a minute. I don't know why.
There you go.
It disappeared for some reason.
Okay.
Okay. So the name princess suggests, and that was her name in this country, but suggests that she was a member of royalty in Madagascar.
Do you know where in Madagascar?
No,
Okay.
but she was on, the story that was passed down in the family was that she was on a ship from Madagascar going to France to study. And she was stolen off the ship, I assume by pirates, brought over to the United States, enslaved, and sold as an enslaved person in Virginia.
In Virginia, okay. So
Yeah,
she was brought to Baltimore and then sold in Virginia.
yeah, because the Baltimore part, that's not in our family tradition, but that was what Horace Mann Bond was speculating was where the ship she was on came in Baltimore. But she was in Virginia. Now, Cousin Gary's done some research. Cousin Gary Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
His mother was a daughter of she was a daughter. She's probably at my mother's level in terms of coming down from the Curtis line in St. Louis. But that's another story we'll get to. But
Yes.
at any rate, he's been intensively researching the Curtis line. And I thought, like, the story that was passed to me was that the princess was sold to the Byrd family in Virginia. But Cousin Gary said it wasn't the Byrd family, it was another family, another prominent family in Virginia.
Okay.
Byrd, B-Y-R-D, Byrd, that they were colonial leaders of some sort. At any rate, the story goes that the princess, was an educated woman, and she had skills. She could do fine needlework and stuff like that. So they had her in the house, doing fine needlework. And she had two daughters, and that's all I know. She had two daughters. That was the family story. And
Who did she have two daughters with?
well, that part didn't come down. But we can guess, because usually enslaved women either had it they were either raped by the white people on the plantation, the white men on the plantation, often the sons of the owner or the owner themselves, and that's more likely because she was in the house. She worked in the house. But also, it's possible it could have been an enslaved man. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But she had two daughters, as I was told. And when the daughter of the daughter of the white slave owner she married somebody from a plantation in Alabama. And one of Princess's two daughters was, quote, given as a gift, close quote, to the daughter, and went with her after the wedding and that's how the Curtis line got to Alabama.
Okay.
And the Curtis line in Alabama was in Marion Perry County, Alabama. Now, Cousin Gary says that there's some generations that aren't accounted for in the story. So we get to the next thing that we know is in the 1840s and 50s. There's a Bible, and I've got a copy of that too. I'm just remembering a copy of this page in a Bible that names family members who, in terms of who was baptized when, in the middle of the 19th century, during the time of slavery. So there were some, I don't know whether they were free or not, but their names were written in a Bible, and I'm assuming they were free. But the next documented information we have is that your, what is it now? Let's see. Your great-great-grandfather was no, it would have been your, I think it was your great-great-grandfather who in the little, there was this little, the town of Marion, the plantation was outside the town of Marion. And so Alexander, see, we're related to two family lines in Marion, Alabama, the Curtises and the Childs. And it all comes together when my grandfather, William Parrish Curtis, married Julia Curtis as his second wife, Julia Childs as his second wife, and she became Julia Childs Curtis. And she was like a second cousin.
That's who I was named after.
Yeah, that's who you're named after.
Okay.
But so the Curtises and Childs were linked, but I think it's Alexander H. Curtis who was the son of the slave master in the old tradition, you know, and where the black woman has no power. So he was allowed. This was a privilege. Get this.
What?
He made pots. He had a skill. He made pots. So he was allowed. He was given time off. Maybe occasionally he would be given time off. He would go into the town of Marion and sell his pots for money. And he was allowed to do that as long as he gave half of it to the slave owner, his father. But out of that, he was able to buy his freedom and his wife's freedom. But this wasn't, if I've got this right, this was not too long before the Civil War.
Oh.
So after the Civil War, Alexander H. Curtis became during Reconstruction, when there was this period when Black people were being elected to office. He was in the Alabama legislature. And Daddy, I have a document that Daddy went to Montgomery when we were in Tuskegee. When we were living in Tuskegee, Daddy made a trip to Montgomery to the records, wherever they kept the records, and got a copy of the bill that established free public education in the state of Alabama. And there are two signers of that bill, and one of them is Alexander H. Curtis.
So he bought his freedom through selling pots. He was the son of the slave owner.
Right,
even though he was the son of the slave owner, he still had to buy his own freedom.
Oh yeah, but he
selling pots. So he was like an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Sort of.
And also after the Civil War in Marion, there was a street where blacks had businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And one of our ancestors, I'm not sure if it was Alexander himself, I think it was Alexander himself, who gave money to the slave owner's wife because she was destitute. That's another family story. She gave money. He helped her out by giving her money because she had no source. I guess her husband had been killed or whatever.
After
She
the
had
Civil War.
no, yeah, maybe, but as a source of income, she had none. So he would give her money, and his family members would say, "Why are you giving her money? She was your part of your slave owning family." And he would say, "She was good to me."
Okay,
So
so I want for time, I
yeah,
want to make sure that we touch on. So you told us about, it's a little confusing. You told us about Princess, right? She
yeah,
had two daughters, one of whom was given as a gift to one of the slave owners that owned Princess's daughters, right? So Princess's daughter was given to it as a gift when one of the slave owners that owned the daughters,
his
went
son,
to another,
his daughter, yeah,
place, right?
he got married.
That place was Marion, Alabama. And
Yeah.
how are Alexander, Curtis, and Princess connected?
Well, he's a descendant, and apparently that story. See, there's some years between because okay, 1865, Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
and the 1700s when Princess was living.
So,
Uh,
but
so
he's
there's
a descendant of the daughter that went to Marion,
yes, yeah,
the daughter of Princess.
right. That's the connection.
So when the daughter of Princess went as a gift to Marion, she had children, and one of the children was Alexander.
Well, there's like a 100-year space there.
Okay.
So there may have been a couple more generations. And that's why I mentioned the Bible, that Bible with the names in it.
Mm-hmm.
But that part is not, I mean, the family has passed on that story about Princess right on through
Mm-hmm.
from the time she first got here or she was brought here.
Mm-hmm.
That's a story that's been passed down in the family.
Okay.
So every person who, the connections between are not necessarily, I'm going to have to pull out that family tree that Daddy and Horace Mann Bond worked out, but I don't think it fills in that gap.
Okay. So
But
now walk me through, there are also Jameses. So
oh no,
that's
that's
a
my
different side.
that's my mother's side.
Okay. So far, what we've looked at is your father, my grandfather's family line of
Right.
how he was born, like who he descended from. So
Yes.
it was Princess, then her daughter. We don't know her name.
No.
Then after that, about 100 years difference, there was a descendant who was Alexander H. Curtis,
Yeah.
right? And then after Alexander H. Curtis, who's that? Who's next? Who's next
Well,
in line?
Alexander H. Curtis, horse and buggy came back without him. And of course, that was at the end of Reconstruction when the Klan was riding. So you make certain assumptions, but painful stories like that didn't get passed down in detail. Because it's the same on my mother's side. There are stories where people say we just don't talk about that. So the story
this picture, well, you
yeah,
can't really see it.
yeah, I see it. Keep it like that. Keep it like.
But this is the picture that includes Alexander, right? Which one?
No, he's not. Alexander's not in there because his horse and buggy came back without him.
His wife is there.
In the center.
So
That's his wife.
his wife.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So, yeah. So she's like your great 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 grandmother.
Okay. And then they had did so who is then who is my grandfather, your father's father?
William Parrish Curtis, who's the one standing in that picture.
Okay. So William Parrish Curtis is
Wait, yeah,
this one.
yeah, yeah. That's William Parrish Curtis.
You can't really
Yeah,
see.
there you go. There you go. Yeah. But I think, see, your grandmother, Julie, is not in there. I think that's his first wife. I would have to check with cousin Gary. He probably knows who everybody is in that picture. I mean, he may know, but I think that maybe the woman sitting below William Parrish Curtis was his first wife who died relatively young, and he remarried.
Okay. So that's when, so we know Alexander H. Curtis and then
Grandfather your great grandfather Curtis.
grandfather Curtis, whose name was
William Parrish Curtis.
William Parrish Curtis. And William Parrish Curtis went to Yale.
No,
No.
no. William Parrish, okay. William Parrish Curtis and his brother, Tom Curtis.
Wasn't his brother also Alexander?
I don't think so.
So why is he in the picture?
No, Alexander's the one who died.
But they weren't brothers?
No, Alexander's a generation earlier.
Oh, so that's his grandfather or his father?
Yeah.
Oh, so his son, so Alexander, whose horse and buggy didn't came back without him, meaning that he was
Killed.
And of course, no one ever was punished for that crime, but he was killed. And then his children were your great grandfather.
My grandfather. My grandfather.
Okay.
Who would have been born, because Daddy was born in 1914.
Right.
So, 1940. I may be skipping a generation. I think I'm going to have to get I'm going to have to get that family tree. I have to dig that out and the book. You know, that's why I was spending so much time looking for it this morning unsuccessfully. But so there may be a generation right in there, but I think that yeah, that's how it worked out. During Reconstruction, your William Parrish Curtis's father was the representative in the Alabama legislature.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that gets us already to the 1870s.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that's right, because
so around the 1870s was when your grandfather was born.
no, yeah, I'm guessing in the, because that would make him about 35 when 80, 90, 110. That would make him about 35 when Daddy was born in 1914.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was his story, your grandfather?
Okay. So grandfather William Parrish Curtis.
William Parrish Curtis, yes.
Parrish Curtis was okay, I've got to throw this in.
Okay. Can you put the computer back so we can see?
Sorry.
Okay. Good.
Marion happened to be a place where this organization, I think it was a Quaker organization, if I'm not mistaken, from the North, they sent teachers to certain parts of the South as teachers for Black children.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the places where they sent teachers for elementary school for Black children was Marion, Alabama. I saw the school. My father took me to Marion when I was 12,
Mm-hmm.
and I met some of I'll never forget one of the brothers. His uncle was Uncle Amzai. Uncle Amzai. Yeah, and he lived in a nice house with a fireplace in every room. They didn't have central heating. They had a fireplace in every room. And I spent the night in this nice, comfortable bed with the fireplace for the heat. Anyway, there was this
nice
one
name, Amzai.
Amzai, yeah.
AMZI?
Yeah. I don't know where it sounds either, it's probably biblical, I would guess.
Yeah.
But on the village green, so to speak, it was like on a hill, and there was a church behind it. Off to the side, there was this one-room schoolhouse,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a school that educated the Black children in that area. And so these children had an advantage. They were educated. And so, Grandmother Curtis, Grandfather Curtis, and all of their relatives and others were educated at this school.
Mm-hmm. One-room schoolhouse.
Yeah, but it wasn't like a little wooden schoolhouse. It was very solidly built, like brick.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so Grandfather Curtis and his brother Tom Curtis went to Howard. Now, I don't know undergrad, I'm assuming undergrad as well, but what I know is that they both went to Howard Medical School.
Okay, Howard Medical School.
Yeah. And, they were some of the early graduates of Howard Medical School. And grandfather William Parrish Curtis became a doctor, and a grand uncle Tom Curtis became a dentist.
Mm.
And they were looking deciding where to go to establish their practice. And they decided to go to St. Louis because it was a community, a Black community that was developing. It had a history, because before segregation was really solid, there were Black leaders. I remember reading about this Black woman who had a very well-known restaurant right on the water, because St. Louis was a seaport town. It was like later became the doorway to the West and all of that. But she was apparently a very powerful member of the St. Louis community early on. And St. Louis. So when Grandfather Curtis and his brother went to St. Louis to establish their practices, St. Louis was not officially segregated.
Okay.
So Daddy used to say all the time that Grandfather Curtis used to go to the medical meetings.
With the white doctors.
Yeah. And then in around the 1900s, early 1900s, politics came in and they started segregating everything. And they started separating the Blacks from the whites in legally, in law.
Okay.
But the Black community in St. Louis was self-sufficient because, it was sort of like Tuskegee in a way that they had their own doctors. They had, like, Grandfather Curtis. So when your Aunt Susan and I visited St. Louis in the late 1960s, we drove across the country, stopped in St. Louis, and met one of the cousins
Mm-hmm.
who had a lot of history in his head. He said that Grandfather Curtis used to have a salon on the weekend where all the educated blacks would gather together to have a cup of coffee and talk, you know.
So he
And
used to host the Black elite.
yeah, but it was a drugstore, because drugstores used to have a fountain.
Yeah.
Well, there was a black drugstore, where you could get a soda and stuff like that. And that's where everybody would gather and chat and exchange information and stuff like that. And so Daddy grew up, that was the environment that Daddy grew up in, and Aunt Constance, his sister, grew up in. And I did find this book, which is, the Boule, the Black fraternity, professional
What is it?
fraternity.
What is it?
The Boule.
Bullet?
No, Boule.
Oh, Boule. Okay.
Yeah,
And where does that word come from?
I have no idea, but I went to this is their constitution, something Daddy I got from
Grand Boule.
Yeah. And this is a book that somebody wrote of the history of it's called, official name is Sigma Pi Phi fraternity.
So it was a Greek fraternity?
Well, I mean, it says first of the Negro American Greek letter fraternities. Now, this book was copyrighted 1954.
So the Boule was one of the first Black fraternities.
Right.
But
and
women and men participate, or just women?
Just men. It was men, but the wives were always involved, in their events and entertaining. I mean, it was serious.
And what kind of things would they do at the Boule?
Well, I don't know. Daddy used to go, though. I know that. I'm looking. There are a lot of pictures in here. I'm looking for the one with Grandfather. They would have conferences every year, gatherings, so people could talk to each other. And when Uncle Lud was in the Boule, and when Uncle Lud in Nashville, my mother's brother, doctor.
You're getting way ahead of this.
Okay, but I'm just telling you one thing.
Okay.
When he died, the Boule had a ceremony where they had a ceremony when members died. They would retire the name from the active list. It was a whole ceremony. I attended it. It was quite impressive. Okay, so anyway, but that was one of the things that Grandfather Curtis was in. And there's a picture in here, but I can't find it right now, of him as one of the founders of the Boule in St. Louis. And also he was a founder of the NAACP in St. Louis too.
Oh, so Grandfather Curtis, well, it's my great-grandfather.
Yeah.
He was the founder of the Boule, which was
in St. Louis.
Which is one of the first, or the first Black.
I'd say one of the first Black.
One of the first Greek Black.
Black fraternities, I would say.
Fraternities. One of the first Black fraternities, right?
Yeah, but it was
in St. Louis, and it was called the Boule. But you don't know why it was called the Boule.
I don't know why, but that was the name of it.
And he was also a part of the founding of the NAACP chapter in St. Louis.
Yeah, and the Boule chapter in St. Louis. It was a chapter in St. Louis because all the big cities had Boules. Because Daddy was in the Boule in Philadelphia when we were there, and also in Tuskegee. But
so how did he meet his wife, your father's mom?
Marion is a small town, and I assume everybody knew everybody. And so when his first wife died, he went back to Marion, eventually, and and brought back Julia to be his second wife, his second cousin, but everybody probably was related. The Childs.
So he married his second cousin.
Yeah. The Childs and the Curtises down in Marion were, related families.
And why did why were cousins marrying? Like, what was that why was that happening?
I would guess that she was eligible. She might have been the most eligible to marry him. Probably, just like you have in Jewish families, since the population was small, you had more of a tendency for cousins to marry cousins.
Mm-hmm. Now, one question I have, because this side of the family was very light-skinned, so was there...
Well, no, the Curtises were light brown, but they were definitely, not grandmother Curtis, though. Julia was light-skinned. Yeah, I would say just because of the history of enslavement and all of that, the longer you're in this country enslaved, the lighter you're going to get.
So was there like a preference for someone who was like lighter skinned at that time? Did that?
Oh, that I don't know.
Like how people decided who they would marry?
I don't know. On my father's side, that was, my mother talked about that kind of thing on her side, but on my but my father never talked much about anything. So I didn't get the impression, because my father was very much a race man, and he would tell you in a minute, don't think you're better than anybody else out there. Don't get any ideas. When we were coming up. So I don't know, but I would, I really don't know. I can't make an assumption.
So, okay. So he meets Julia, his second cousin.
Well, he probably knew her.
Well, he marries Julia, his second cousin. They go back to St. Louis.
Right.
Where he's already practicing medicine.
Yeah.
So he didn't go to Yale? That was like some...
That's on the other side of the family.
Oh, okay. So that's another conversation.
Yeah.
So then they have how many children together?
3.
Okay.
And that was Daddy, Aunt Constance, was a little younger than Daddy, and Julian. And Julian was disabled, very disabled, to the point where he, at least the way it was described to me, sometimes he didn't get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
He died when he was 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
And
was he the youngest one?
I don't know, but I know he was younger than Daddy, because, I don't even know that. But I know Daddy said that the reason he got interested in airplanes and flight and engineering was he was interested because the family story goes that one time they went to dinner at somebody's house when he was a young boy, and then people looked around and said, "Where is he? Where'd he go? Where's Billy?" And they went looking, and he was up in the bathroom, and he had unscrewed the handles on all of the on the wash basin in the bathroom, and was like fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
So
he knew he was going to be an engineer.
Well, he was all interested in technical things even as a young kid, but because grandmother Curtis really was preoccupied with taking care of Julian, Daddy said that she would give him money for him to get on a streetcar and go out to the St. Louis airport. That's the airport that Lindbergh flew out of when he went across the Atlantic. Yeah, so he would go out there to the airport and watch the planes. And he was fascinated by that stuff, you know?
I thought that was Uncle Bill. I didn't realize that was.
No, Uncle Bill took after him, Uncle Bill later.
So just for time, and because it's a lot of information,
Yeah.
so let's review. So we looked at how Princess is the earliest known ancestor that we know of in our family line, right?
On my father's side.
On your father's side.
Yeah.
And she was coming from Madagascar, going to France to study. Do we know what age she was? Teenager?
I would guess she was a teenager. That would be a guess.
She was a teenager en route to going to France. Her ship was hijacked by
whoever.
He was taken onto another ship and taken to the United States. We think it could be Baltimore because of some records showing people coming from Madagascar to Baltimore.
Yeah.
And after that, she was taken to Virginia, right?
Yeah, right.
Where she lived with the Curtis family. And then when
No, she lived with what I was told was the Bird family, but Cousin Gary says it was a family that begins with a B, but it wasn't the Bird family. And
okay, so a family that begins with a B, but when she had two daughters, her two daughters who we don't know what their names are, one of the two daughters was sold or given as a gift.
Yeah, given as a gift.
To the daughter of the owner who moved to Marion, Alabama once she got married. And
it was a wedding gift.
It was a wedding gift. So the daughter was given as a wedding gift, a human wedding gift.
Exactly.
And Marion, and that's why she went to Marion, Alabama.
Yeah, that's how the family got to Alabama.
That's how the family got to Alabama. And then there was a cousin, maybe 100 years later, Alexander H. Curtis, who bought his freedom, right?
Yeah.
Because he was the son of that slave owner that was in some relation to the one who got married, right?
Well, I assume it's, the same plantation.
And then he bought his freedom and his wife's freedom, and then eventually they had children, and the descent, and their children, one of whom was grandfather Curtis.
Yeah. William Parrish Curtis.
Grandfather William Parrish Curtis, who then went on to go to Howard Medical School, he and his brother Tom Curtis, and they both went into medicine. Howard was a famous medical school for Black people, and so he became a doctor. What kind of doctor?
I think he was a general practitioner.
He was a general practitioner. He wanted to open his practice, right? Expand his practice. So he was trying to figure out where to go. So he decided to go to St. Louis because
He and his brother went
to St. Louis because St. Louis had a thriving Black community, right?
Right.
And that's where your father was born.
Mm-hmm.
And he was born as a result of grandfather William Parrish Curtis losing his first wife, who passed away, going back to Marion to meet with his cousin, who then he married, brought her back to St. Louis. Her name was Julia. And then that's how my grandfather, your father, was born.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, so I'm calling this series "We Are Pioneers," and before we sign off, where does that, because that's something you said all the time. So where does that phrase, we are pioneers, come from? Who said
Well,
that to you?
my mother. See, that was my mother talking. She would remind us, especially when we were in Pennsylvania and got annoyed with the white people's conduct towards us. She would just remind us, we're in her Southern accent, because she had definitely a Southern accent, and I can't really imitate it correctly, but she would say, we are pioneers. Just don't forget that. We are pioneers.
And what does that mean to you?
Well, we were um, we were in the forefront, leading the way for the rights of African American people, and we had to put up with stuff, but we were going to make it through. That was the whole attitude. These people don't know who they're dealing with, but we know what we know what we are, where we're going. We know where we're going, and we just have to put up with these folks sometimes. But she didn't put up very, very easily. She would tell people about themselves. She would.
So so the reason that I called that this series, We Are Pioneers, is in honor of my grandmother, your mother, and we'll get more into her side of the family in the next episode. But to give you a sense of from getting to the Americas from Madagascar to getting to St. Louis, that's where we are right now in the story.
Right.
It gets very juicy at this time. We're going to talk about that in the next episode. But in the next episode, we're going to visit with my grandmother, Ruth Augusta Perry Curtis.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
My mom's mom. We're going to visit her family's birth, or stepping onto the scene until up to her birth. And then we can talk about next how they met and how my mom and her siblings were born. And then we can talk about me. So we're going to go through this. Why do you think, Mom, that our family is exceptional?
Well, I don't know whether our family is exceptional. There are a lot of families that have achievements, but what's happened is that we don't hear much about it because most of them are in family stories that are passed on by word of mouth. And, you just don't get that many, like Michelle Obama's book, Beloved.
Beloved.
I mean, now Becoming. I'm mixing up authors.
It's Toni Morrison.
Yeah. She really details her family, not necessarily going way back, but she details her immediate family and the generation before. And not that many people have had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Sorry.
And so those stories haven't been told, but there are a lot of people. I mean, we didn't come out in a vacuum, for sure. All those traditionally Black schools that were founded, one thing that, we'll mention next time is Homer G. Phillips Hospital, which was a Black hospital in St. Louis. There were a lot of people involved who were accomplished things. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to have our stories told by us, because I think a lot of times historically, when I was teaching, my students would always say they didn't want to learn about a textbook version of how someone interpreted their history. They wanted to hear it from the mouths of people who had experienced it. And I think it's very vital, especially with Black people, African Americans, people of color, for us to tell our stories and for oral traditions to be written down. Because before, you would just pass it down orally from, generation to generation. But now, because of technology, we can write it down, we can record it. So it's very important that we do that. And that's why, for me, I wanted to do this project with you so that we can try to document as much information as possible,
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you're doing it.
Yeah. This is the first episode. We'll get to the second episode, so stay tuned. We'll talk about my grandmother's side of the family, my mom's side of the family, and how they evolved. And we'll continue the conversation and see how everybody met. So thanks, Mom. Thanks for tuning in. And
Thanks, Loon.
any
Thanks for
final
working.
words?
Huh?
Any final words before we close out?
Well, I'm just glad you're doing this, so keep it up.
All right, I'll text you after, but I'm going to sign us off.
Okay.
Okay, bye. Love you.
Love you.
Bye. Let me see if I can. Okay, stop.